Hello, everyone. Today, we're talking about, again, my deferred ownership party, my new ideology. Today, we're going to be talking about, since I'm wearing something related to education system today. This is my bear. His name is Premichek, and he exists. He's a nice being. He's got these nice, cute little claws, and he'll take you over. Anyway, besides the fact that my bear will take you over, we're going to be talking about education. Indoctrination education. Education for the party. Okay. So, the three words in the English language when it comes to anything in education is return on investment. This is something very, very important that very, very few college students have even the slightest idea of what percentage their degree is even going to give them. So, in my new education system, I plan to allocate that in our national quota system. Yeah, does this sound authoritarian? It is. I've never said it isn't. But yes, in the Danish system and other countries, even Singapore to some extent, most of my politics based in Singapore, but this time we're going to talk more about Denmark. Denmark has a system where they literally control the amount of degrees that people get. Now, there are obviously pros and cons to that, but the big pro is there's no student debt. You're not spending a whole freaking decade paying off student loans. And so that is the big, big pro that people just don't. Like, if you want college to be discount, okay, let the state dictate on how many degrees are actually needed in the marketplace. Because the problem is we're getting degrees that don't have any use whatsoever. Yeah, you're going to spend some money on the degree, obviously. But yes, prices are inflated because GI money comes in, because people take out student loans, because they're federally backed. All that stuff's true. Economically speaking, the government has made it so student loans become more expensive because colleges get more expensive. There's no incentive to lower costs. Even if everybody boycotted a year, they still wouldn't lower costs that much because the government's federally backing these colleges. You need the government to get away from the colleges. You do, to some extent. Yes, is it wrong that researchers wouldn't get paid? Okay, in that sense, we should probably fund that. But, having students come in, funding, no. Right? I want professors to do their research, mouse utopia, crap like that. Very dystopian research. But I don't want them to be funded to oblivion to where now students are having to pay for the mistakes of government. Right? So we need to reform the whole thing. So here's what we do. We give the loans that are the most needed in society 2% on their student loans, right? We're talking engineers, accountants, degrees that are really, there's a big shortfall of these jobs. They have a 7% growth rate in the market. We're going to give them the lowest interest rates. Medium risk degrees. We're talking, I don't know, degrees like teaching maybe would be 4% on their student loans, right? On federally insured student loans. And what we would do is, the problem is with, teaching degrees, right? We're talking education degrees, English, maybe not mathematics, but most subjects like history, English, there's too many people with those degrees. There's not enough, but not everyone's getting a job. So it still has a high unemployment rate. Don't get me wrong. The sector it does itself. But there is a 10 times the size for these degrees now. Because now in the future, in the next 4 years, there will be a shortfall of degrees. And then the people who are saying, no, I'm not working for that, I can make more money at Amazon, are still going to work at Amazon. They're not going to want to be a teacher. So you still have people like that. It's just not enough money to justify getting a teaching degree, so return on investment's low. But because there's a lot of people with that degree, I say 4% for those guys. No offense to teaching, but if you know that there's a lot of people that have the degree, there's probably a reason for it. It probably, for some reason, is easier than the engineering degrees. I don't know why people seem to fail engineering classes more than teaching. Probably because the math you really have to connect the ideals up really well. Also, you gotta think about the retention rate, right? Teaching, after 10 years of not teaching, you lose half your knowledge. After 2 years of engineering, you lose half the knowledge. So obviously an engineer is going to make more than a teacher, right? So yeah, that's why the interest rate is going to be 4% on those student loans. And 6% is very, very risky loans. We're talking something like an art creator or curator, whatever they are, right? The ones that assess art. there's not going to be that many jobs. Or like, I don't know, I'm thinking like the guys that do the auctioneering school, whatever. There's just not enough jobs for that crap. So obviously it's going to be 6%. And then jobs like basket weaving or stuff like that should probably be banned, honestly, from federal aid or what crap. So obviously we're doing a 3-tier system, and we're going to use the Bureau of Labor Statistics at 10 years. Because in the United States we have a census data for the Bureau of Labor Statistics for 10 years. However, I advocate for a 5-year system. So instead of doing it every 10 years, which is really slow, we do 5 years. I think the market's way too resilient for us to be measuring it every freaking 10 years. And sadly, I don't think the BLS is getting enough funding from us to even justify the 5 years. But we should, in my new political ideology, we would hopefully have given the BLS enough data or enough money to give us enough data. So obviously our indoctrination education is going to work well. And then what are we going to do in these schools? So I would say all the way up to middle school, you learn reading, writing, arithmetic. But in high school is where things get a little interesting. So, like elementary school, middle school is when we actually put the drill instructors in. We talk with the military guys. Middle school and high school, we get military gym teachers. We aren't getting these normal gym teachers. I'm sorry. We need actual discipline. And so in order to do that, we're going to need some military drill instructors to actually give proper incentives to the people. But our teachers in high school will be different. They will be actually people from the private sector. No more public sector unions. It's either going to be private sector. They don't care if it's a union or not. I don't care about that. I don't care if they're a union member or not. What I care about, however, is just like learning from somebody that's actually been outside the education system. And their performance will be based on how much money the students make. So if the students make, let's say collectively as a class, 30 students make, I don't know, let's say $4 million, right? The teacher will get paid on those results. Let's say the students are in debt, however, or followed really bad advice, right? By the way, the teachers are kind of like guidance counselors. In my school, we would integrate the guidance counseling into the school. So the teachers would be like guidance counselors. They would be teaching them all the skills they would need to maintain their home, maintain their car, things that the students don't want to do, but it's necessary. And so women can actually get independence from men for once. In my system, we would actually give women independence. And also, if you have kids in my system, they write that off in your taxes for the rest of your life. Now, if you have 4 kids, so let's say you get 1 kid, right? 25% less in your income tax as a woman. If you have 4 kids and you remain married to your husband, 4 kids, you have to be married though. 4 kids, you get 100%. All your income taxes are off, except for obviously our defined ownership mandatory savings account that you're just gonna have to pay your 17% in. But everything else, for the most part, you'll be fine. And so, like, when you get out of this high school, you get to pick between obviously college, or you get to pick between the skill that you learned in high school. And knowing that you've learned this skill in high school, you will hopefully, what you do is you work actually for the first 4 years after high school. You're going to work as a janitor. Why do you work as a janitor? Well, I did for a year, so I can't really say that you should do 4 years. But the reason you should do 4 years is you need to build up you need to build up the ideal of being loyal to a company for a few years. Like, you need the idea of holding on a job. That's a very, very important skill. The reason why is I've seen people in my life who can't hold a job for their life, like for the life of them. There was this one guy, my uncle. Now, he finally has been able to hold a job for more than 2 years. Most of the time, though, he gets fired or he loses his job after like 5 months. He's got so many jobs. His resume's got to be super long. He's very detail-oriented like that. He's able to organize everything to get the job. The problem is, with my uncle, is he can't hold down a job. So in my system, we would actually force you to work 4 years, and you would contribute to your forced savings account. Maybe we would do it at half rate because you're not actually doing your skill, but you would still have to do it. You'd still have to pay in the Social Security system, which is our new deferred ownership party system, which I've talked about in the previous episodes. If you don't know, it's about 70% index funds, 30% U.S. Treasuries, short-term U.S. Treasuries. The market fluctuations aren't that bad. And obviously, you would have democratic control over those funds. And, you know, in our system, we educators would be seen as a necessary evil. They wouldn't be seen... Because the thing with education, right? With teachers and things like that, the reason why they get paid so low is also that, you know, the 2-year thing with the engineering, 10-year thing with the teachers, right? Another thing with teaching, and the reason why they get paid so little is because you're in the academic environment your whole life. Obviously, we're going to change it with the high school. We're not keeping people in a classroom at high school. We got to get these hyperactive kids somewhere else. We're going to put them in a mechanic shop just for a few days, put them in a HVAC company and watch him let a guy fix an air conditioner, explain what he does. You know, the teachers in high school are going to be from the private sector. They're not going to be from the public sector. They're not going to be unionized. They're going to actually have real world experience outside of academia, and they're going to get paid based on what their students learn. It's going to be a national, national review system, and if they suck really bad, then we're going to obviously fire them. But it's like, you know, teachers should get paid based on results, not based on what union dictates their wages to be, in my opinion. If all your students are failing grades, right, and also they can't read and write, obviously you're going to obviously lose your job anyway. But in a union situation, there are teachers complaining in 4th grade these kids are not even at a reading level, and that should not happen. Kids should be at a reading level. The United States has been a very, very literate society. Even during the 1770s, when the U.S. Constitution was drafted and ratified, everyone could theoretically read. All normal, light-skinned people could read. Obviously, sadly, the slaves couldn't read that much. But, yeah, most people, my ancestors, were able to read during that time frame. Now, when they landed in the United States, what was the colonies at the time, in Virginia, they obviously couldn't read. But after a generation or two, most Americans actually read very well during the American colonies. And so, like, we should keep that heritage of us being very literate as a society. We had one of the most highest literacy rates, even higher than England. The British colonies were a very, very literate society. What were you going to do in the woods? Well, if you were bored enough, you would just read. You'd be your little stage and you would just read. Stooge, I guess. Stage, I don't know the actual term. You would read. You'd be very studious. You know, if you were bored, you would do that. We need to harness back the spirit of our ancestors that were living in the woods in the Virginia colony, you know? Obviously, I don't live in Virginia. I don't know much about Virginia. But, you know, chances are a lot of people's ancestors probably did arrive from Virginia. Who knows? So it's just very, very interesting to me that our ancestors were very literate, and now we're having kids struggling. Obviously, they're young, so they're going to struggle with literacy rates. And obviously, I'm dyslexic, so I don't always read the best. But knowing that I can read very well compared to most people, I do read every day. I read YouTube comments. I read stuff online that interests me. I read the Bogleheads forum. I read things. So our education system should be based on trying to grab as much knowledge as you can by reading. No more of these fake stories. I hate, like, you know, for instance, I'm in college, right? And I'm reading all this ancient Greek stuff that has nothing to pertain with my life whatsoever. It's not maybe there's some moral lessons in it, but in my opinion, the moral lessons be more important than the actual fictional story. I don't care about any of this fictional stuff. I'm a fact guy. I love learning about outer space. I love learning about the markets, the capital markets. I love learning about certain things, but college is not geared for the curious. It's geared for the people who are more creative. And that should not be the case. Like, I'm sorry, but creativity doesn't lead to doesn't lead to most successful life. There's a lot of creative people, sadly, that are in debt and paying years and years of interest on their loans because they didn't know the knowledge. Knowledge is way more important than creativity. Don't get me wrong. I do think that, and sadly, I do think in middle school and high school it does get rid of the creativity. These college students are more geared towards structure-based than creativity. So obviously we should still harness the power of creativity. And people with dyslexia, I've noticed it doesn't affect them as much, the education system. They keep their little kid personality, still keep that curiosity in them. And that's what probably makes me very different than most people. Most people, they aren't hyper-focused on being curious anymore. They've just assumed that the world is out against them, like the socialists, you know? The world's out to get them. But in my system, or my mind anyway, I think that the world's not out to get me. I'm just very curious on how the world works, how these hierarchies work. I'm creating a new political ideology based on the study of hierarchies, based on what I've studied. You know, the founding fathers in the United States saw these different people, all these different Minister and John Locke, and they would study all these people, and they would say, okay, these are where our civil rights, civil liberties are from. I disagree with the founding fathers because they didn't have a complete picture. They never had semi-presidential republics during their day. I'm seeing what other countries do, and I'm like, why don't we do it here? You know, because obviously the founding fathers had a lot more monarchies to look at than republics. And the Roman Republic wasn't a very good republic to be looking at as a historical example. They had the Swiss. The Swiss was a semi-successful republic. Most of them were just not very good. You know, San Marino and Switzerland were like the only two republics I can think of off the top of my head that were never monarchies, but were, you know, very, very, where the lords controlled everything. You know, those societies didn't have as many beautiful lords. So, obviously, we should learn about the education of what happened to the founding fathers, and we should learn about my spiritual journey, or not spiritual journey, but, you know, learning about hierarchies journey. I don't know what you would say, but you know what I'm thinking. Like, studying political systems should be on the top of the lists of, like, how we divide power is to be very, very important. And why giving war powers, commander-in-chief powers, to the president is an extremely bad idea. Because the problem is, you know, when Congress gives them, you know, 72 hours to report to Congress for any military missions, well, guess who actually is the war power at that point? It's the president. So all that war power should just go straight to Congress. So I'll go to a prime minister in Congress. Or in a parliament system like I advocate for. It should never go to a president. I'm sorry, the president should be, he should have the total power of peace. So he does have a lot of power in my system. And he does appoint senators. I think 1/2 of senators and 1/4 of senators. I haven't really decided on how much power the president should have. And he should have the power to appoint Supreme Court people in my system. But I haven't created a system where the president has the war powers. I think that is a total misnomer. He said the power for local affairs and peacetime affairs. Like, the enemies have to beg for mercy from the president. That should be separate from the prime minister's commander-in-chief powers. Kind of a dumb system I've created in my head, but peace and war should be separate. Anyway, you know, that's what our education system should focus on. Return on investment, political systems, things that I find interesting. Outer space, in case we end up colonizing things, which, again, it takes, 12 minutes for our communications to go to Mars. Depending on how close we are to Mars, which is very sad. We should learn, if we're going to colonize Mars in the next couple decades, how we should do it. We want the next coming of scientists, and, you know, my political ideology is very futuristic. Anyway, me and my bear friend are going to enjoy the sun. We're going to do a good job today in the sun, you know, in this beautiful landscape we call what is this? Parking lot? Yeah, parking lot. So we're going to enjoy the parking lot, me and my bear with the cute claws. It's very, very adorable. My bear named Prematech. He's going to do very well. Prematech's in middle school, obviously. Haven't been there in years. Anyway, Goodbye.